Welcome to this episode of the Upfront Podcast. As always, I am your host, Nina Mueller, and this is the place where you get your dose of upfront and honest conversations with people from all around the world. Enjoy the show. My guest today is Cécile Nebbot. Cécile was born in Marseille, France in 1967 to liberal Jewish parents whose recent ancestors had been expelled from Spain and then eventually from Tunisia and Algeria. She's an economist and communication expert with a background in brand content and strategic consulting, and for 2 decades she had worked for leading consulting firms based in London, New York, and Paris. She has a deep expertise in econometrics, and in 2020 she co-founded an Institute for Art and Future Design based in Berlin to deal with contemporary art, future foresight, and the epochal shifts we live in. Amongst its expertise and clusters of research are cultural frictions and democracy, artificial intelligence and ethics, and climate change and symbiotic politics. We are talking about integration versus assimilation of Jews in diaspora countries, the Jewish people's actual resistance to oppression as a small persecuted minority throughout the centuries, and how we can handle the false narratives being spread in the information war we are being forced to fight next to the actual war in Israel. This is a content warning. This episode includes mentions of assault, rape, mutilation, murder, war, racism, and terrorism. Please be aware. Well, hi, Cécile. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Nina. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So first off, please tell me a bit about yourself.
So about myself, so I'm a French citizen. I'm Jewish. I will get back to this a little bit further. But basically, I have a career as an economist and communication expert, working for nearly 2 decades for strategic consultancies in Paris and also with missions in New York, London, Luxembourg. And actually, like at the period of the COVID, I just need to change my life, like many people on this earth, I guess. And in 2020, I decided to take the opportunity to join kind of startup. It's an Institute for Art and Future Design based in Berlin. And this is where I am now, working and dealing with topical issues of our time, dealing with future topics, future foresight, and contemporary art. And may I speak a little bit more about my family history?
Of course, as much as you feel comfortable with.
So my father was born in Algeria, in Algiers, at the time of the French colony. And my mother was born in Sousse, that's in Tunisia, at the time of the French protectorate. They are both Jewish. So if we go back in history, that's kind of interesting because it's kind of a witness of the diaspora of Jewish around the Mediterranean Sea. So it gets back to 1492 at the time of the Alhambra decree that happened in Spain. So my father's elders were expelled from Spain under this Alhambra decree that was an edict issued at that time, and this was edicted by the Catholic monarchs of Spain. It was Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. And my mother's, who was born in Tunisia, her elders came also from the Iberian Peninsula. Her elders were expelled as Jews because of the decision of these Catholic monarchs of Spain at the same time. But the way her elders came to Tunisia was a bit different from my father's side, as her elders settled for a while in Italy, in Livorno, and then they moved to Tunisia. I just called my mother actually a few minutes ago. to have some little details about it. I don't know really much about it. I know that one of my cousins is doing research about the family getting back hundreds of centuries ago. But what I know is that they embarked on boats in a clandestine manner. And they basically had no choice. It happened a lot that Jewish from the diaspora took the name of the towns they used to live in. So that could be kind of a possibility, in the history of my family on my mother's side.
It's interesting that you do have like this much information going back that far, because I know a lot of us don't, like, depending on kind of the country in the diaspora that you were from, whether it was like with Farhud or being exiled from this place to that place and then being exiled again, or with the Shoah, the Holocaust. There's a lot of us who don't really have any documentation or history going back that far anymore because it's been lost to history.
I see several reasons for that. One is that I mentioned a cousin of ours is really into this genealogy research. So he wants to go very far into and very deep into the history. So, and when we meet him, he tries to exchange on his new findings. And also, the history of my parents. So I was born in Marseille, but I was really my whole youth immersed into the history of my parents, who were themselves forced to leave their land to come to France. So to make it short, because maybe people don't really know that, but as Jewish living in Algeria and Jewish living in Tunisia, they had the French citizenship. So that's why I was mentioning that it was they were born under the French colony for Algeria and the French protectorate, which is a little bit different in terms of legal and administrative context in Tunisia. They had themselves this breach kind of fragment in their own youth in their life, and I grew up with these questions of where did they come from, and also I have to mention that the Jewish coming from Algeria and Tunisia, this was like in a nutshell of like 10 years difference between the independency of Tunisia and the one of Algeria. So I was really much questioning all that, and the thing is that these Jewish coming to the metropole of France, even if they had the French citizenship coming from the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, they were called like les pieds noirs, so like black feet. It was really pejorative, and I had somehow to withdraw this part of my history. I wanted to be French and to have 100% of my rights, and I was very proud to be French. And I mean, I didn't want to hear about this history, but very unfortunately, they were still suffering from that. It was quite fresh, of course. So that's why I question a lot, and that's why and how they also witnessed their history and their background.
I feel like, especially for the diaspora, I think it has become over so many centuries a Jewish issue, I think, to really be looking for one's roots, because so many of us have been displaced multiple times, as you can see in your own family history. I think it's become a Jewish thing because we've been exiled from Israel, we've been exiled from various places and had to resettle. And I do think, even though, especially in France, I feel like many have even assimilated, not only integrated into French society. That's why I would question whether you're not Jewish before anything else, because it's a kind of a bigger thing, I think, to belong to the Jewish people. Because even if you assimilate, you're kind of never really, the same as another citizen who was born and raised there, has a long history in a country. I feel like it's different, isn't it?
I think it's a good question, and I think it's a critical question, even if it doesn't seem like. But for the reason that I evoked, to me, it has always been very important to identify myself as French. And being Jewish was my religion and my origins. Of course, we know, and yeah, I'm kind of became an activist since a few months now, and I do lots of research on the roots of the Jewish people of what is now Israel. But I was aware of my roots and my origins, of course. But to me, being French came first. There's a big difference knowing that you are part of a people. It's actually I try to think while I'm talking, but I've been very much disturbed about all these questions. I think they are not easy questions. You know that your ancestors came from the southern Levant and what is now Israel, and you know that you have these common roots from the tribes of Israel, but you know also that it's a religion. So, and plus I grew up as liberal Jewish. I think all these makes like a moving ground. And to answer your question, did I identify myself first as a Jewish? I would say no. I would say that I was feeling French most and foremost, I would say. And Jewish also, of course, was very important. But I think the identity of a person is like a multifaceted dimension. So I have also other facets of myself. But of course, being a Jewish person is very important. It is also defined in the way you immersed into the culture of being Jewish. Do you connect to the local community in Marseille, for example, when I grew up, and then in Paris? Do you connect with your cousins and your family? And here there was also like a very special thing about my family, that my father was, because of the childhood that he had during the war, he was born in 1935. So at the end of the war, which was the Second World War, he was exactly 10 years old, the 8th of May of 1945. And he knew what was the war like. While my mother came later, so she didn't have the same perception about it. But he really suffered from that, and this is one of the things why he just closed up. So we grew up. Unfortunately, years after, I more and more realized that. But very unfortunately, I say we because I have a sister and a brother. So we didn't grow up like in a traditional communal Jewish environment. When you meet your cousins, when you go to the synagogue, and you do all these celebrations. Our family was very, very close between my grandparents, my parents, and us. So, and I think this also is a blocking event in how you define yourself as a Jewish first, let's say.
It's interesting that you brought this up, because I was wondering this a lot, because once I moved to Paris, I noticed that in contrast to a lot of other diaspora locations, I felt as though, and I did actually hear directly from Jews in Paris specifically, that they were French before anything else. And I found that to be quite surprising. So I was wondering whether it was like going a step beyond integration, but sort of assimilation. Maybe did that have anything to do with like the post-French Revolution? And a lot of Jews actually told me they see it more as a religion and not so much as a culture and a people, a nation originally. And I think, yeah, there's a dissonance, I think, for me personally, in what I've experienced here to, like, in comparison to other places in the diaspora.
Actually, I'm surprised of your surprise. I was not aware. I thought I was kind of, a weird element in the whole Jewish community in France.
I guess not.
I guess not.
Yeah, no.
But I don't, to say things differently, I don't like the term integration or assimilation. It's like, because there's a double understanding of that, and kind of a double standard or a second level of meaning. If you say you're integrated or you're assimilated, it means that you were not. I was 100% French, and I defended that. And of course, also this means that I wanted to defend from something. What is it? I think coming from Algeria and Tunisia, so the Maghreb, when they came to the metropole of France, they were considered as low-class citizens. To say things also differently, like Arabs, like Algerian Arabs, this kind of unknown, of culture, of practice, of whatever. And of course, I didn't want to identify to that. It's much more, I would say, a question of migration and citizenship than a question of religion, to my opinion. What I felt, I speak about myself, right?
Yeah, sure.
And also because, my Italian origins were very much closer than the Spanish one. So, and I learned Italian as school also. So I'm much closer to the Italian family. And I also heard from my mothers, when my grandmother came to France, as originally from Italy, they were also considered as second-class citizens in France. Maybe we are not aware of that now in the 21st century. It looks like weird to say that, but it's not so far away. But at the same time, these even migrations within continental Europe was considered for a country like France, and as you mentioned, with the whole history of the French Revolution and the separation of state and religion, and all the grandeur and the human rights and all that we know about France. So accepting migrants from even Italy or Spain or Portugal, these people coming in the country suffered a lot and had to fight a lot to settle a new life and having the same status, let's say. And this was not really explained in these terms, but I could feel that there was a shame, some kind of shame, as not as Jewish coming to France, but as Algerian coming to France, and as Tunisian coming to France, and Spanish and Italian. So this is, to me, this is much more a question of nationality and citizenship than a question of being Jewish. Of course, this is another layer that adds to the complex story.
I feel like there's a lot to talk about, identity and integration, migration, immigration, whatever. But I would like to speak to you about more recent events, because that's how I actually found you on Instagram, or we found each other somehow. So since October 7th, I'm sure you or your perspective and your activities have changed too, to some degree. Do you personally see a different reaction in people to you being Jewish over the past 2 months in comparison to before October 7th? Or is that something that generally doesn't really come up?
Difficult to say. I shall have a quick answer on that, but actually not. I'm very active on Instagram, and I want to restitute the truth, basically. Of course, the events is about Jewish, and it's about Israel, and it's how deeply I feel it in my blood and my cells. But I think it's much more about ideas that people confront me. What I can say is that there's a tremendous friendship and recognition and strength within the world community as Jewish. I could not have imagined that ever before. How I'm able to have really strong and deep connections and comments and exchanges with Jewish living in Los Angeles, in New York, in London, in India, in Australia, of course in Paris, but other countries as well. I think these events of the terror attack by Hamas, the 7th of October, one of the residual, let's say, impact of that is that it has really strengthened the whole community worldwide of Jewish. It's really impressive. I think it's something quite unusual, maybe. And myself, I'm sometimes surprised. Why did I become just an activist like that? It grew up little by little. First, it was like being astonished and see you see the images and you're just shocked and you want to. I have family living in Israel as well, so you're just under shock, and then there's a whole transitional thing about being aware and then taking part of it. But very quick, what happened is that I saw lies, I saw like misunderstandings, I saw like ignorance, really.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, then hatred and violence, anti-Zionism and all that. There's a whole bunch of ignorance in this whole world. And that's how I came back to that. So do I have a different relations as a Jewish person to the others? Yes, certainly. But it's very much within the community of Jewish people. Then certainly with others, but then with non-Jewish, maybe it goes more into an intellectual and kind of dogmatic way, and factual things about history and things like that, and trying to understand and raise truths and post-truths and how algorithm transforms the reality and the propaganda and all that. So it's much more an intellectual exchange and kind of connections. It's very much more like emotional, of course, and sensitive and more real somehow with other Jewish.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I actually hadn't really thought that much about it, but in all the previous wars we had, because to clarify here for listeners that might not be aware, Israel was constantly attacked by Hamas. Every 1 to 2 years, they fired missiles. There were terror attacks every now and then, and it kept increasing and increasing. And we were actually used to having to be attacked in Israel with missiles and knives and guns. But October 7th set a new standard for barbarism in a way, definitely. It's interesting that you said that you weren't this vocal or at all advocating against anti-Semitism. Has your stance on Zionism and Israel changed because of October 7th? Or what was the motivation behind that? Was it the propaganda that you saw, the ignorance and the denial of what happened to innocent civilians that triggered you to do something?
Okay, when I was young, I was part of the Beta, which is like a Zionist movement for youth, so but it was for a few years, and certainly it had already at that time opened up like understanding about the history of Jews in Israel, and also the Palestinian issue and all this stuff. But what happened since the 7th of October is very much about, yes, ignorance and lies, really, and hatred. And this really I cannot stand. This is just unbearable, and just to let it go. And I need to wake up in the morning and look at myself in the mirror, and this kind of shame and pride and proud that I evoked earlier. This is maybe very important for me. Okay, I was born in 1967. And I grew up with a quite fresh idea of the Second World War and the Shoah. And I saw many documentaries, videos, and films, etc. And maybe I'm much more sensitive than some others, but this has really defined my ethics somehow, and the way I see life, and what defines social life with others, So, and I've always questioned a question that all Jewish, possibly, I mean, at least European Jewish, ask is that what would you have done during the Second World War? And also as a French person, so Jewish and French, resistance, of course, in France was something very strong and is still very strong. So I always identified the resistance, of course, and where is truth and where is wrong. And so I'm happy to see myself as a resistant here, really. And I think it's very important not to let it go and not to just be coward and take the lead to have a voice and share your opinions and document from trustful sources, of course, which is also part of my launch into this institute that I co-founded in Berlin. It's very much also about democracy and cultural frictions. And I mean, these are parts of the topics we deal with. But even within the Jewish community, there's a lack of knowledge. There's a lack of understanding about the history. And I think this is really missing. I think it's important because in a normal world, let's say, politicians should be involved into spreading the truth, spreading the facts, getting back to history, shedding new lights on a conflict that is very much localized and opening up a systemic thinking about what is it all about, the global jihad and all that, And I think this is all very important. That's why I reacted on that as a Zionist and as very much involved.
Mm. Sadly, I have to say it's kind of nice, if that's even the appropriate word, to see that other people are standing up for Israelis too, because like I can tell you from personal experience, sitting in a bomb shelter or in your staircase being attacked where you live, it does feel a bit surreal to see online while you're being attacked for nothing but being a living Jew. It is a bit weird, to say the least, to see so much hate online. And at least now, it took many, many wars that we had to endure without anyone ever saying anything, really, apart from Israelis themselves. But it's nice that at least now people are waking up and saying, okay, this is not okay. So, yeah, thank you for the work you're doing.
Well, yeah, thank you. I mean, I appreciate it.
Can I ask you, is your partner Jewish?
My partner is a German woman. She's not Jewish. She's Protestant.
I was actually kind of hoping you would say that because there's an interesting question I have here that I wonder a lot. How do you approach talking to each other about what you're going through right now and what the Jewish people are going through, and Israelis specifically? How do you talk to her about that, or how does she approach the topic?
We approach the topic in very different manners. And yeah, first of all, there's the religion, and the difference between Catholics and Protestants is quite strong. So there's a kind of natural connection, shall I say. I'm not an expert in religions, but I should say. But what I know about is that there's a natural connection between Jewish and Protestants. Catholics have a behavior and the whole set of practices that are very much at the opposite of which is the Jewish practice of Judaism. So this helped, let's say, to have this common ground. And then I'm very much into history and facts, and we discussed a lot about that. I think because she's a curator, an artist, and a facilitator, so she has lots of knowledge about also doing research, So this is kind of a natural ground we come together. And one of the first things I wanted to claim when I started my activism, let's say, on Instagram is to restitute the truth about the history of 3,500 years of life of Jewish people in the former Canaan region. And so this was, of course, it started like at the 11th century before the Common Era. And there was the king of Israel and the king of Judah. So, and I started to go deeper into this history. And then we also discussed this a lot. I think history is fascinating. But yeah, we discussed a lot about the history, much more than, of course, the facts and the horror. But we very quickly detach from that, even if we both feel like it's a tragedy and still ongoing, of course. But I'm very much more involved than her, of course.
Mm.
My position is also I try to set myself on the side of someone who is not a Jewish person, who is maybe anti-Zionist, who is maybe anti-Semitic, and so I try to always question that. And one of the way I found is to give voice to, I did some research about Muslim Zionists, and there are lots of very recognized and sought after speakers, public speakers and researchers who are Muslim Zionists as well. That's always the way I position myself, not into the very details of the conflicts, because I'm not sure it can serve a cause. But this is my approach. I think the way it can serve the best the cause of Jewish and Israel is to restitute the truth and to step back and to see what's the whole picture about it.
And it's good to hear that you're on the same page, at least, because I did wonder what happens to people who are in relationships with non-Jews, because I felt very isolated, for example, because the community here is, I as an Israeli am very different to them. So I did wonder, like, what does that do if you're in a relationship and you might not be on the same page? Because I feel like that could be devastating on top of the emotional devastation that we're already experiencing. So let's talk a bit about your work that you're doing, because we're actually fighting a war on multiple fronts that we are unfortunately forced to fight. One of them being the online sphere, as you've said, that has turned extremely toxic with anti-Semitic slurs, death and assault threats being thrown around just willy-nilly, and so much misinformation running amok. Some of it surely has to do with reporting that I have to mention here by media networks such as the BBC and the New York Times that have become increasingly anti-Israel and therefore pro-terrorism, one could easily say. So many Jews and some Israelis in the diaspora are forced kind of into hiding their identity, taking down their mezuzot, taking off their necklaces and kippot, and changing their names on apps like Uber if their name could identify them as being Jews. How has your life changed, like your everyday life? Do you feel differently? Do you feel more protective of yourself or your identity in a way?
That's an interesting question. And yes, I totally agree with what you said about these media outlets. Yeah, CNN, BBC are the most visible. Yeah, I won't go into the story, but yeah, my personal life, I have a witness about little event that happened with my mother and my sister. We own a nice apartment in the French Alps, and we decided to rent it. And since the event, my mother came to the apartment and took off the mezuzahs that I just put just few months before, and she didn't even ask me, and she told me when it was done, and I was really shocked. And I'm still very shocked about that. So I would say that within a family, sharing the same education, the same background experience of life, somehow, we also have different opinions about how to deal with that. And I'm not the kind of person who hides. This is not how I am. I'm sorry for the one who think differently, but I'm not even sure it can serve a cause, really. To me, it goes very much more into education and dialogue and exchange and meeting people, much more than just hiding. It doesn't serve anything to hide. Plus, I would say, because even if I don't practice so much, Okay, it's Hanukkah at the moment. I practice that. I do the big celebration.
When there's sweets, right?
But I'm not sure much about. Okay, yeah. So, but I read a lot about the Torah, and I'm fascinating, and I'm so proud to be Jewish because I think it's the most wonderful religion on earth, really. To me, to my opinion, one of the interesting thing is to be proud of what we are, really. And I think we are not victims. We've never been victims. I don't see our people as victims, really. And that's why I don't want to hide. I'm proud to be Jewish. I know lots of people are hiding at the moment.
I find it kind of bizarre that I would rather, along with many others, rather live in Israel and be attacked, not to the degree of October 7th, but rather be in Israel where there's potential for all-out war, instead of being in a diaspora country where I'm not sure where my neighbors stand, if, it comes down to it. I think it's interesting that a lot of people do choose that over, being uncertain. What do you think the role of social media plays in the widespread misinformation? I feel like TikTok might have something to do with the hatred of Jews and the growing bias against Jews, but I'm not sure whether social media as a whole has anything to do with that, or whether it's just pure old anti-Semitism.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we all know that algorithms and artificial intelligence and all the technological capabilities of social media are an immense weapon to propel misinformation and what is called post-truth and deep fakes and all this stuff. The impact of spreading an information to, I don't know, 1 million of people through an artificial intelligence tool, of course. I mean, how do you, as human, how can you compete with that? So it does exist. I mean, of course, people know that. I mean, most of people know that. And I also work in cybersecurity in another life, but I'm pretty aware of how it works.
But you didn't create pictures with kids with 6 fingers and stuff in Gaza, did you?
Yeah, that's it. It's like Mid-Journey tool. You can really go deep into creativity and create all sorts of design and fake things.
Apparently.
Yeah, true. The thing is that I question myself, how can you convince people that such information is fake information? And I'm very, very critical with the digital era and to my opinion, the impact on education and culture. I think it's a disaster. I think it's an intellectual and moral failure that we see at the moment. And that's why also I took the lead to open my mouth and, do all this activism on social media. We live a critical moment of history. To my opinion, it's much more than what happened the 7th of October. It's just what happened. The terror attack was just the starting launch of awareness or darkness or obscurantism or, democracy versus ethnocracy. But I think it has now proportions that are just unbelievable. But I think it's just a result of course, there's, again, I'm not an expert working on this topic for decades, but there has always been anti-Semitism. It's still vivid. Mostly, it's very easy to accuse the Jews. This is the root of anti-Semitism. So my belief is that with the digital era, with all this fake news, with propaganda, And with the lack of research and, the easy way now that we document our life, I mean, who buys newspaper? It's gone. So now we basically nurture our understanding of the world and the mechanisms of the world, be it politics or economics or whatever, through social media, through images. This is totally stupid, It's like shrinking the whole process of information.
Mm.
And that come from economics and communications, of course. I mean, and language and semiotics and wordings, all this stuff are very important for me. So I think basically there are people anti-Semites, but mostly they're ignorant people. And there are also all these people who just want to, have an easy access to what they believe is the truth. And they want to claim that they're, pro-Palestinian. I am pro-Palestinian. That's why I want the Hamas out. Mm-hmm. But I think it needs to widen perspectives.
It's interesting. I feel like maybe it's also the level of intensity that we hear it at, while a lot of people are silent, kind of like during the Holocaust, really. I think the silence of the others only helps the oppressor, as I think, I'm paraphrasing, but as Elie Wiesel once so famously said, that's the issue, because there's a lot of people who are very loud in their hatred of Jews and pro-Hamas or whatever they want to claim, just being anti-Semitic at the end of the day. And then other people are silent, and the other voices that are very loud. By the way, did you hear about the statistic that I think it was 1 in 3 of pro-Palestinian accounts or pro-Hamas accounts were bots, as in robots, were fake accounts?
No, I was not aware of that.
And I think there maybe I'm misquoting that article, but I think that might be the difference too, because of the algorithm. Interestingly, we don't know what the situation exactly is, like who is standing in solidarity against terrorism or who's, pro-terrorism. Apparently that's the thing now. I don't know. But it's fascinating because the Jewish people worldwide make up 0.2% of the world's population. So we're a really tiny minority, but yet, dare I say, one of the most persecuted ones out of all the minorities. Do you think that there is a rational reason behind activists that are advocating for inclusivity and an intersectionality to specifically exclude Jews other than anti-Semitism? We have to stand up for Black Lives Matter. We have to stand up for LGBTQ plus rights. We have to stand up against, those anti-abortionists.
Yeah, and then the same people,
they're quiet or pro-Hamas or whatever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, what I read so far and what I think is the truth, I discuss also because around us in our network, we have lots of American people, other journalists or artists also, what is called the woke movement. Actually, it's kind of a complex idea to reformulate, but the thing is that the woke movement was against what represents the supremacy of the white male. So that's basically the idea. And the idea is that it goes against the Black people, it goes against the LGBTQIA++. And the thing is that the Jewish are absolutely identified as a shortcut to this supremacist white male society for some reason. And I think that's the reason. And basically, people, I don't want to be dogmatic or, but I think people are more inclined to go and defend what they believe are victims.
The underdogs, so to speak.
Earlier, we as Jewish, we have this kind of proud to be Jewish. And self-insurance and also self-respect and sense of justice and ethical speech and all this stuff. We never positions ourselves or behaved as victims.
People don't like that, do they?
People don't like that. I think that's one of the reasons. I think people don't like that, so they want to defend what they believe are the victims, even in front of the most horrifying barbarian acts that we saw during the 7th of October, perpetrated by the Hamas on Jewish people. Not only Jewish, actually, even our people being Israelis. But yeah, they want to identify to what they believe is the victim population without knowing anything about the history of Palestine, which goes back to the British mandate of Palestine, and earlier to that at the epoch of the Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, which was also the moment in history where Palestine came first as a name for geographic land and nothing to do with any kind of nationalist thing, you know. So basically, people are ignorant about the whole history of it, but they just see something that they consider as obviously victims, and they want to defend that. Is it because they want to position themselves as defenders of the world, of a big cause? I don't know. This is kind of weird, because they don't know anything. And if they would really want to defend the Gazans, the Palestinians living in Gaza, they would say, obviously, let's get rid of Hamas. I mean, Hamas took the lead over the Mahmoud Abbas, and they just killed hundreds of people, and they still continue to kill their own people, Palestinians. So if you want to go into the topic and understand the political context of that, the whole thing doesn't make sense. But they just take the victims, what they believe to be the victims, and they go for it. I think that's the easy way, which is totally wrong and stupid, to say the truth. But yeah.
It's interesting because whenever you see people going to one of these demonstrations and confronting people marching for Hamas, I guess, I don't know, against Israel, whenever they're confronted, or when I confront people with historical facts, they don't know anything, not like silch, absolutely nothing. It's interesting. They don't even know that Palestine was never a state. It starts there. But I guess a lot of people want to be hip, or because it's kind of a movement now, or whatever you want to call it. And I guess if it's repeated enough, they just buy into it. But I remember like a couple of years back, it used to be a thing that before you posted something, you would actually go and research whether that was a fact or whether you would just spread like propaganda. Because as Trump famously invented, that whole right-wing fake news kind of thing. But now, I guess we're seeing that towards us actually, and not towards actual facts. But yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a crucial element, and if we don't do anything, if we just stay silent, not only on these facts, what happened the 7th of October, but generally speaking, I mean, the whole society is going to collapse, honestly. And what is left? We see what is left. The right wings of political parties pops up everywhere.
Yeah. And even so, before that, I wonder about this exactly, because especially in diaspora countries, and specifically in European countries, I feel like politicians are on the more right-leaning side of the political spectrum. They usually, or maybe that's just what we hear, but I think it is kind of the trajectory that we're seeing now. They tend to voice their solidarity for Israel more than the left side. Is that also what you have observed? And do you think this is going to influence elections?
I mean, it's a funny thing, honestly. The right wing used to be like the Nazi side, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So, and we see it in France as well, with Le Pen. The thing that also, I mean, history has a time length very short in the mind of people. And all these youth, they don't even know that Marine Le Pen has a father whose name Jean-Marie Le Pen, who said once, the Shoah was just a detail in history. So they don't even know that that she has a father who obviously denying the history of the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
They know nothing about that. They have a time frame of a few seconds, playing with the media thing, social media thing, So how can you expect them to be clever enough to do their research and understand the things, So, and now, of course, because of all these populist movements coming from the same logical roots, of course. The same people, the right-wing populist politicians, they use this to ally with Israel, but it's a weird story. It's kind of a weird story. I mean, and what kind of degree of trust can you have in these people? That's the question I'm asking. I mean, I'm happy when I hear Javier Milei celebrating Hanukkah, but I'm a bit skeptical. I don't know. It's a question that I'm asking.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting point, I think, because anything to fit the narrative, I think, is kind of the thing that comes back into my mind all the time, because I had a few discussions with French Jews here, and they were well aware that Marine Le Pen is very problematic, to say the least, in her family history specifically. And the party she's standing up for, and the values they usually portray, especially when it comes to minorities. And I do wonder, is it anything to fit your narrative right now? But what about in 10 years? If their whole agenda in their political party is to kind of be against any minority, it's going to be against the Jews too, if we're talking from an egotistical point of view. So yeah, with, the march against anti-Semitism in Paris, I noticed that a lot of Jews were like, oh, I'm going to go, which I understand. But then I looked up who is actually going, because I, as the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, I wouldn't want to be marching next to neo-Nazis. I'm sorry. No way. Over my dead body, literally. I saw that Marine Le Pen actually said, oh, we're calling on all our constituents to join in the march against anti-Semitism. And a lot of Jews actually went. And those are people that are not usually voting right necessarily. They're also people who usually vote left. I think the marching against anti-Semitism was more important than who they were marching with. But symbolically, that also translates to different elections, a different society eventually, different values. What do you think?
I think that the same way that the people who know nothing about the Jewish history and Israel should pay attention and think twice before speaking, and reference their sources, etc. So the same way I address to them this claim, the same way I would like to address the Jewish people to be cautious about ethics and morals, and who's behind, and what's the propaganda, and where is truth and post-truth, and where is political intentions. So I think it's very important to be moral, to get back to the understanding of all the web network behind, the manipulation behind, it's very important. Otherwise, everything is possible. So if you have the hope, at Tikva, the hope to reconstruct a society based really on fairness, on justice for all, on truth, and all these values that shape democracy, basically, you have to go behind and not take the first thing, not to take the first social media post or story or video, and not to follow the first politician who just say, let's march against anti-Semitism, So who's that person? What are the intentions? Particularly speaking of politicians.
Yeah, checking for like lobby affiliations.
Yeah. So I respect any kind of positioning in terms of politics. At the end of the day, it's a question of process and your beliefs and how to deal with social and economical issues. So, and of course, it depends on your knowledge of what is basically the structure of a society. It depends on your background. It depends on your history. So, but what I don't respect, I'm sorry to say, is the people who just take the first thing and go for it. This is the big danger of our time. Like shortcut, like real-time effect, like live. I mean, of course, it's super damageable to have all these live images coming from Gaza, for example, because if you go further, that everything, if you're a bit clever also, I'm sorry to say, but we know that journalists who just film the Palestinians dying, suffering over there, so everything that goes out from Gaza is controlled by the Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they control. They are not stupid. Of course,
including the death toll. Mm-hmm.
So if they were stupid, that would be much easier, And why they're not stupid? Also because they are backed, financed by Qatar, by Iran. They rule the world. It's billions of dollars each year that they receive from Qatar and Iran. They have all the technological capabilities, intelligence, and other stuff. So the images that you see out of Gaza, they are just filtered, enhanced. And there is also this. It's like Hollywood in Gaza or Pallywood.
Mm-hmm.
It's Pallywood. Yeah. #Pallywood. So there, yeah. I didn't reflect on that because I think it's so stupid and, So I don't want to go into this direction. But apparently, and as I'm not there also to witness directly, apparently there are fake actors in Palestinian living in Gaza who just fake being shot. And then you see them in other circumstances after being dead. They're just, talking to other people in other situations. They're not dead anymore. And they have another job. Like a doctor in a hospital or something.
Oh yeah, I know which guy you're talking about. There's one specific one that keeps popping up everywhere. He's got 15 different jobs.
Yeah, I cannot see his face anymore. But so it just exists. So.
And it's incredible that people buy into this.
Is, the issue, one of the main issues we should deal with is it's a war of information. Mm-hmm. It's a war of information. It's about that.
And it's incredible that people buy into it. The photos with the doll where a mother and a father are
that's terrible.
Crying about their baby, which is not actually a baby. It's a doll. It's a plastic doll, and you can really see it. It's incredible. Anything that serves the narrative again. Mm-hmm. A sad testimony for our society, I guess. Have you seen any of those videos where they interview in all kinds of specifically European countries, but I've also seen those Daesh kind of people, like Muslims calling for a caliphate all over in the US as well. And people being interviewed at demonstrations against Israel in Germany and France, where they are actually saying that they want, and they're saying it publicly, they want a caliphate in all of these countries. Do you think, how much do you think it's going to take for the non-Jew to wake up and say this is not okay? Because it would damage their life too. It would harm their life, and it would seriously change their lives. And how much do you think politicians should intervene here?
So very cool, very good multiple question.
Sorry, making it very easy.
Do I have a few hours in front of me? I'm not very hopeful about the awareness of people. I mean, the common people living in United States, in London, in France, I think they are not aware of that. They are not aware because it's another word. They don't understand the logic behind. They don't get the point of being possibly stabbed, in the street or wherever because you're just Jewish. And being Jewish is a foreign thing, It's like an object, a UFO. I think it will. I think they won't wake up. So this is from their side. I mean, the people, either Christian or Muslim. I mean, where are the moderate Muslims also? It's been years, decades since the Daesh attacks in Paris also that I say, where are the moderate Muslims? They should talk. They should say something. We don't hear them. I mean, and then you just astonished when there is this Muslim phobia also. So, they should also take the lead and say something about the criticality of what's happening now and the caliphate and the global jihad. In terms of responsibility, so there is these passive people who just receive information and go for it, and they are not aware of the impact, I'm sure. They don't get the point, There are these moderate Muslims who should speak and they don't. And that's a big error, to my opinion. And that's why I identified, to name a few, like Noor Dari, as a Muslim Zionist, British Pakistani writer and public speaker. There's also, of course, Mossab Hassan Youssef, the son of one of the Hamas founders. He's super strong. There are others that I follow, and they really speak the truth, And so that's also an important factor in terms of how to deal with the situation and how to mitigate the damage of the situation and avoid a global jihad that is on its way. And of course, to my opinion, the governments, politicians should also be very strong. I mean, our French president, unfortunately, has chosen to withdraw himself from the geopolitical scene. Really, it's, to my opinion, a little disaster. So on the other side, I'm really astonished of the strength and courage of the German politicians and how they are really strong. They take measures also against the AfD, which is the right-wing party, which has very unfortunately, they're on the second position at the moment, so they rose a lot. But there are states, because of course it's a federal state, so there are 3 states who just took the lead and identified that the AfD is non-constitutional. So possibly this right party, also to refer to our earlier speech, possibly this right party will be declared as anti-constitutional and would disappear. This could be an option. But this kind of effects, positive effects, can only happen with the courage and the clarity and the vision of a government that says the truth. I mean, take an example, Olaf Scholz, the federal German chancellor, was invited, the Turkish president, Erdogan, just a few days or weeks ago. And just in front of him, he just claimed the right of Israel to exist. So that's daring. That's very daring. And I think politicians should be courageous to say the truth. And very unfortunately, it happened they don't do so because they need what they believe to be the Muslims' vote. This is a big error for the time to come. So that's the point. And the ones who are courageous happen to be very often non-moderate politicians, but the one from the right wing. Why? Because these people dare to speak the truth Of course, they are populist, and they also deal in a weird way with economic mechanisms, which I absolutely don't give the slightest trust. But on the other side, they are able, these people, to speak the truth, because they don't care about, voters' context. I mean, they have an idea, they go for it, So there are lots of double standards, justice, and double effects also. It's a very complex situation. I think we should take this very seriously. We as citizens and we as politicians as well.
Thank you so much for being here. It was a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your insights and for talking about it so openly.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you so much, Nina, for having me on your podcast. And, it's been a brilliant experience, and I think you have wise questions, straight to the point. I think it's important to be clear and to identify what are the important questions and elements of frictions and all this stuff. I think you totally you have a holistic view of the situation, and that's very interesting.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm happy that you can share that, of course.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
I'm Israel. Hi.
That's perfect. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Upfront Podcast. If you haven't already, give us a follow and join in the conversation on Instagram and Facebook at The Upfront Podcast. Take care and see you next time.